香港時間早上5:01啦，去到星期四，收睇緊嘅係 Action World 世界頻道同埋後備頻道 Action Voice。今日咧，我哋要講嘅話題咧就比較係嚴肅少少啦，就係講緊呢一個現代嘅奴隸政策，即係 Modern Slavery， 究竟係講緊啲乜嘢咧？同埋點樣去防止人口買賣？就呢個咧都會係好多人都會係認識嘅。咁就亦都希望大家支持我哋個頻道啦，透過 patreon.com/action 或者 Super Chat、Super Sticker、Super Thanks 等，我哋可以走更加遠嘅路。請嚟嘅嘉賓咧就係 Matt Friedman。Matt 咧就係我差唔多咧10年前 D100 開台冇幾耐咧，就我其中一位訪問嘉賓，估唔到咧10年之後咧，佢喺 Action World 頻道嗰度咧再次見面。Matt, it's a pleasure to have you appearing at Action World and also Action Voice. Can't believe, last time when we did the show, it was at inside the Apple Daily building when where they host the D100 radio because it was just a startup.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's 10
years. A long time ago.
Yes.
At least
yes.
10 years, for sure. Yeah.
Good to see you. Now, I guess for those who missed the show at D100, because all the so-called political, all the current affairs content is taken down right now. So people cannot review what we talked about 10 years ago. First of all, before we talk about what is human slavery and also anything related to human trafficking, maybe can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you get involved in the modern slavery of things?
Yeah, well, my story started about 30 years ago. I was living and working in Nepal. I was a public health officer, and we were finding girls 12, 13 years old who were HIV positive, couldn't understand what was going on. So we went to go and interview them and pretty much heard the same story over and over again. Human trafficker guy would go into a remote village, flash a bunch of money around, say he's looking for a wife, find a girl. He'd actually go to the family. They'd agree to allow him to marry her. They'd marry, and then he'd say, I'm going to take your daughter to the capital, Kathmandu. But instead, he takes her to Mumbai, India, to the red light district. And when he gets there, he puts the woman in the room and says, I'll be right back. He goes to the madam to get the $500 for having sold her to the brothel. He has the gold from the wedding, and he hands the wedding pictures over, and then he leaves. Madam goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband just sold you to me, and you're going to be with 20 guys a day, every day. You can imagine this girl's shocked. No, my husband loves me. No, that's what happened.
Yeah.
When many of the girls kind of come to accept the fact that this is what's going to happen to them, they say, I'll kill myself before I do those shameful things.
Right.
He then brings out the picture of the wedding and says, is this your mom, your dad, your brother? If you hurt yourself, we'll hurt them. So in order to make her into a prostitute, you just shame her. They bring in a couple of professional rapists, rape her 20 times, 30 times until she lays back. And then she's put on the line, and she does that for several years. So I was hearing this over and over again, but I didn't understand the evil of it until I went to those brothels.
Okay.
I had a police officer with me. The Indian government brought me in for public health checks, went into one of the brothels, and there was an 11-year-old trafficking victim. This girl saw this guy, saw an opportunity, literally ran up, wrapped herself around me and said, save me, save me. They're doing terrible things to me. I turned to the police officer and said, we got to get you out of here. He said, no, we can't do that. I said, why not? You're a cop. He says, well, if we try to leave, they'll kill us both. To make a long story short, we left. We came back with more police, but of course she was gone. I tell this story because I wasn't one of those 15-year-old activists that say that when I grow up, I want to do this type of work. But it was such an extreme situation. I didn't help that girl. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. And so I kind of surrendered to the fact that now that I know about this, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And 30 years later, here I am talking to you.
Okay, let me try to do this translation in 30 seconds. 咁就Matt 講緊30年前就去到尼泊爾啦，咁就長話短説咧，就係見證到即係人口買賣，即係12、13歲嘅女仔，咁就被賣到去印度，咁就啲女仔講緊係要每日咧要接成10幾20個男人，咁可能係 So it's the girl is sold for $500 US
That's
back
right.
30 years ago. Yeah.
Yes.
Can they bail out back 30 years ago after performing as a sex worker for X number of years? Can they leave?
They only leave when they get sick or they stop attracting clients. If the clients are still coming and paying, it's virtually impossible to get out of there. And if she's not so sick that she can't work, she'll stay there as well. So sometimes they last for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It really depends upon the girl, how healthy she is, and the luck that she has being in that brothel.
咁呢個即係呢個咁嘅情形咧，就係講緊30年前。And you were very young then, and then you were with an NGO when you went to Nepal. Was that right?
I was actually with the U.S. government. I was with USAID. So I was part of a donor agency that the U.S. government had to give money to governments, and that's what I was managing.
Right. USAID 大家即係一個美國嘅 NGO 啦，咁就我唔喺呢度多講啦。咁不如即係依家講緊咧，即係 The Mekong Club 啊，湄公河。People know about the Mekong River, I guess. Mekong, it's famous. But what does the Mekong Club do? Is it anti-human trafficking, or is it more education about what's going on in Asia?
So 10 years ago, I set up an organization in Hong Kong called the Mekong Club. You're right about the river. The name is based on the river goes through Southeast Asia, and that's where we do most of our work. And we used club because we work with the private sector. And if you were to put anti-human trafficking or anti-human rights in there, it would scare the private sector away. So we work with the private sector in a positive, supportive, non-naming and shaming way. We help them to understand the issue of human trafficking so that within their supply chains or within their banks, within their hotels, they can figure out what this issue is and they can address it directly.
Yeah. And I guess human slavery is more than just sex trafficking. It is abuse of child labor and so many others too, right?
Yes. There's about 50 million people in modern slavery. About 75% of them are in forced labor. That would be people who are on fishing boats, in sweatshops, domestic helpers that are being exploited, people who are basically on construction sites. There's many different variations on the theme, but the basic scenario is a person loses control of their life. They can't get out of the situation. They're forced to work and they don't get paid.
咁即係講緊係現代奴隸嘅呢啲政策啦，即係你可以係童工啦，咁會唔會係後生嘅僱傭兵咧？即係呢個我特別想問下Matt。Would there be anyone who was hired as a hired gun to act in a war situation? Like
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Could you repeat the
someone
question?
who is hired to fight, just like a mercenary.
Well, yeah, I mean, you find child soldiers in different
Like
parts
Cambodia,
of the world.
of course. back then.
And you saw it in Cambodia. You see it in other parts. I'm sure
Yeah.
they have it in Myanmar. You see it in African countries. If a person is taken and kidnapped and then forced to be a soldier, that would be human trafficking as well.
Yeah. But then now I understand when you say the Mekong Club doesn't want to talk too much, kind of go for the jugular and say, hey, we do have an agenda to fight against human trafficking. But how do big corporations look into this education process? Because in Nike factory, I know I'm not saying it's Nike, but let's say footwear factory. I don't know.
Yeah. So
garment. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about a garment factory. So you basically have a company that uses factories within Asia. And what these companies are trying to do is to ensure that there is no exploitation associated with this. Because if it's found by an investigative journalist, it makes it into the newspaper, and then they're named and shamed. Now, a lot of NGOs will be the ones that are wagging the finger at the private sector to say, you're bad. But if the private sector has nobody to go to understand the issue and address it, then they can't fix it. So we are on the side of the fence where we say we are going to work with the private sector. If they find an issue, we're going to address it, but we're not going to do it in a way where we embarrass the organization or we out them, because the companies are inherently motivated to fix things because it protects them when they do so.
Right, and they should have a high impact governance, right? All these big corporations, these Fortune 500.
With ESG, with corporate social responsibility, with people kind of looking to see that companies are actually businesses with purpose, the expectation is that if a company is found to have issues and problems like this, they can lose a tremendous amount of market share.
嗱，即係阿 Matt 佢本身咧，The Mekong Club 係唔係淨係講緊防止人口買賣？而佢主力係做咧就係 deal with 啲大嘅公司咧去 educate 佢哋，即係咧某啲情況之下咧，會唔會係掂到啲所謂紅線咧？咁呢個係我會問佢。Would you educate some of these so-called big corporations and businesses that you might touch on the red line if you hire, like people of a certain age or a certain group? Would that be part of your job?
Well, what we do is we help them to understand the criteria that is used to determine whether modern slavery takes place. For example, if a company holds onto the passports of the workers, that's a modern slavery indicator, because that basically holds them in place. If there's indebtedness among the workers, and that means that the person can't leave because they're told you can't leave because you owe us money. If they basically switch contracts and say, after they've signed an original contract that you have to sign another one that cheats them, that would be an indicator. So what we try to do is to help the big brands, the big companies, to work with the audit companies to go into the factories and to see that none of those things happen. If they are found, then we work with kind of the factories and the brands in order to address these issues and fix them. So the contract isn't immediately terminated. You try to fix something first, unless it's really super bad and people are really being illegally kind of confined and exploited, and then it's a different situation.
Have you successfully, or you can tell from experience since you have started this for more than 10 years, locate like some of the so-called bigger names, and then they didn't even know they are in violation of certain codes? Have you?
Well, let's look at a typical supply chain. A typical supply chain has tier 1, which is where the assembly takes place. Tier 2 is where the zippers and the rivets and the shoelaces and the sole and the textile comes. Tier 3 is where the raw material comes. For 30 years, most companies have been auditing tier 1, where they assemble it, but nobody has looked below that. The new legislation around the world mandates that they have to go all the way down to the lowest level. So a lot of companies have never looked at that. They don't know what's happening at that level. And so we anticipate that they will find issues and problems. And so we help them with the process of tracing the supply chains and then identifying what they need to look for in order to ensure that they are not in violation.
Okay. If it is more like a tech company, ISO 9000 standard.
That's exactly right. That type of thing. Try to make sure that they have the standards to ensure that they are in compliance. Because what's happening, and I don't know if you do much with ESG. ESG is the environmental social governance mechanism used by companies to demonstrate that they're doing right by the world. The S in ESG has modern slavery in it. And there's a lot more emphasis on companies collecting information about what's happening within their supply chains. And if they don't do that, it becomes a real reputational risk as well. So there's a lot of pressure on companies to do the right thing at this time.
And how do you spend your time? Mostly, like your typical day will be educating, I guess, corporations and then making talks, but not really go back to like your experience from 30 years ago with USAID, really like doing anti-human trafficking stuff. Not anymore, right?
It is a form of anti-human trafficking, but even with my Mekong Club work, I still have my hand in raids and rescues in different countries, cases where human trafficking are taking place that are outside of the corporate sector. As an activist, as a person who cares about this issue, as somebody who's been doing it for over 35 years, it's really hard to completely divorce yourself from some of the things that you did in the past. So I'm often brought in to address those other cases as well.
Right. Any interesting cases in the last 10 years or so? Interesting in the sense that something going to, let's say, a brothel, some underground casino, and then rescuing someone. Anything like that happening?
I think what's happening now, that the press that's focusing on these young Hong Kong, Taiwanese, Vietnamese, Singapore people being tricked and deceived into going to Cambodia and then forced into these scam facilities. I'm working a lot with organizations that are trying to get these kids back. This is because usually what you have is a situation where you get trafficked to do some type of menial work. In this particular case, they're trafficked to scam other people. And so you have people who have never felt any trauma at all of a sudden in a situation where they're yelled at, they're beaten, they use tasers on them. And so this is something that I've been working a lot on recently. And this is an area where actually the Hong Kong government has kind of taken it more seriously, where they have a task force and they are, put a hotline on and preventive activities. The same in Taiwan, same in Singapore, because actually you're talking about middle-class kids that are being trafficked. That never happened before. So you can see how the pressure is a little bit different, because it's not some kind of migrant, ethnic minority type that doesn't have any power. You're talking about families that have influence.
Well, because they put up ads saying, you could get jobs in Cambodia. And the snakehead, I think from the news, they found him. It's from mainland China, right? The snakehead.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of criminals that are based in Cambodia from mainland China. It's more than one person. And what happens when the pressure to close down the Cambodia version of this happens, it moves to someplace else. We're seeing it pop up in northern Laos and in Myanmar, in locations where it's kind of no man's land, where you have the militias from, the Myanmar, country that kind of run these areas. It's kind of lawless, no rule of law, and very little influence. The government can't go in there and kind of shut these things down. So I suspect you're going to see more and more of that mutating and evolving in different parts of Asia.
How safe is Cambodia, since it is Southeast Asia? And there's a lot of U.S. corporations. And I think last time when I went to Cambodia was a few years ago. Was it McDonald's or even Burger King? I can't remember. But there's a strong American presence, from my understanding.
There has been for a long time. There was a time, long time ago in the 90s when it wasn't very safe. And then for nearly 2 decades, Phnom Penh was quite a safe place. You could walk around. There's not a lot of issues. I don't know now. If I've heard that some of these vans are driving around and just picking people off the street. Wow. If that's the case, then you have an issue. And this has created a situation where a lot of people from Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, Singapore don't want to go to Thailand, Cambodia, or Myanmar anymore.
Right.
Impact could be if they go there, if somebody decides to just pick them up.
Okay. Now, to extend the Mekong Club service, would self-defense be something under your consideration, since we can run into some gang members if you talk about these so-called Southeast Asian countries where rule of law is not intact?
And actually, the interesting thing is that the age distribution I've heard was 17 to 52. So it's not just young people. It's people who are able to kind of communicate via a computer, that have social networking skills, and they're educated enough to be able to come up with a coherent argument. But if you don't scam enough people, then something significantly bad often happens to you. And I've seen there's a lot of video that's going around in the social networking realms that shows what happens to these people. And I'm hoping that becomes a deterrent for people who see that you can make 5,000 US dollars a month working in a casino in Cambodia. It seems too good to be true. And it is too good to be true because it's not real. You go there, they're going to pick you up and you're going to have a bad time.
Oh yeah, yeah. You will lose your freedom.
That's
At least,
correct. Yes.
I think probably for a long, long time if you respond to some ad on the internet.
Yeah.
But last but not least, Matt, you have a North American missions trip. What is it about? And is Toronto your last stop? And how far will you go?
It's 53 consecutive days. I'm on day 11. I've done 20 presentations in 11 days. I started in Vancouver for a week in Toronto, a week in Ottawa, and then I fly to Atlanta, Chattanooga, Charlotte, Raleigh, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, and then Hartford, Connecticut. So the whole thing is, 53 consecutive days. A lot of corporations, a lot of banks, a lot of faith-based groups, a lot of Rotary clubs, so what we're really trying to do is to help the general public and the corporate sector to understand the relevance of this particular topic and to just get more people involved. Because there's 50 million people in modern slavery, 25,000 people enter per day. And last year we helped less than a percentage point out of this. So we really need to get the world to step up and be a part of the solution.
Yeah. 50 million in modern slavery. And we're not counting drug trafficking. We're not counting arms trafficking, just human trafficking.
Just human trafficking. Yeah.
Yeah, 50 million. Yeah. That's, the size is huge. That's all I can say.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Would you be, or your team member visiting central part of Canada as well? Or is it just Vancouver and Toronto?
Just those two this time.
Okay.
I hope to come back and do other parts of Canada in April. And I have a trip planned at that time. So if there are people who are interested in presentations, we do them in person or online as well. But the idea is to just try to get in front of people and help educate and inform them, and so that they can be a part of the solution.
Yeah. And I hope, like next time when you are in town, I'm more faith-based than anything, believe it or not, even though I'm a money person. But organizing, talks in churches, that would be excellent.
We've done one church and we have another 4 or 5 that we'll do. It's a very important part of the process for us too, because of our faith.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's a Christian faith, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So I look forward to seeing you in person. I know this time is very difficult, but but I'm sure we'll be in touch. You and your team partner, who is now in doing some presentation in Vancouver. Haven't seen you guys in person for 10 years, so it would be good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, doing it viral. Yeah.
Yes.
Now let me just bring out the contact details. So definitely for people who are who have any inquiries about the Mekong Club, you can contact Matt Friedman directly. And the NGO is a Section 88 organization based in Hong Kong, I guess. Yeah, right. So this is the website will be the Mekong Club, right? .org.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Matt. I'll talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very good.